Inscriptions on tombstones, when interpreted, provide background information for fascinating analyses of societies, not just in aspects of how we celebrate the dead or the rituals we use for death, but in a broader and more comprehensive way. They provide collective perspectives on worldviews at given points in time, and they reflect the cultural aspects of the people who created these monuments or mementos.
Why do I feel so bad?
Of course, there is the obvious point that people immediately understand, such as genealogies, but far beyond this, they provide us with an intellectual discourse of the way previous societies have seen the world in which they lived, how they related to that broader view, and how this was played out.
Night after night after day.
Today's tales are from the tombs of the Jewish cemetery in Bridgetown, Barbados. In our last program, we were introduced to the Jewish cemetery, and the history of their coming to Barbados was revealed. Historian Dr. Carl Watson examined the iconography of the many tombs, making mention of the skull and crossbone and the cutting of the tree of life, among others. Today, we continue our examination of the funerary architecture to be found in this cemetery. Additionally, two individuals will share their perspectives on the compound. Just in case you have wondered why this place is so well preserved, Dr. Watson will provide the answer. We begin with tales. And these tales become even more fascinating. Now, in addition to revealing that the man interred here was the founder of the Jewish synagogue, the tomb's inscription tells us about how the Jews wittingly assimilated into the society by assuming different identities.
Historically, this is a very important tomb. Now, it's in three languages: Hebrew, Spanish, and English. And what is interesting is that the English portion differs somewhat from the Spanish portion. Here it simply says in English, "Here is buried the body of Mr. Luis Diaz, who was beloved, respected by all in his time. He died on the 27th of December, 1699, being 83 years of age." First of all, he lived to 83 in an age when if you reached 40, you had lived a long time. The average age of death was 40, 45 years old. So for somebody to reach 83 years of age was quite a feat. But then, other interesting stories about him, because if you read what is said about him here in Spanish or Portuguese, because it's like a blend of the two, called Ladino, he is identified here as Joseph Jesurun Mendez, whereas here he is Mr. Luis Diaz. The name is different. It's the same individual. Now, why do you think he changed his name? In a day and age when Jews were heavily persecuted, in order to be accepted by the broader society in which he lived, he essentially had two personas. For the public, he was Luis Diaz. In private, he was Joseph Jesurun Mendez. But more importantly, it says here, it gives age at death, que falleció de 83 años, and then it says here, fundó a synagoga de Nidhe Israel. He founded the synagogue of Nidhe Israel. This synagogue is Nidhe Israel, the scattered of Israel. He defended and protected everyone, including his ancestors. And so in Ladino, Portuguese, Spanish, it's telling a different story. It's telling the Jewish history of this gentleman who also came to Barbados from Brazil, fleeing the persecution in Brazil. He came to Barbados that was perhaps more accepting of him, but yet not completely accepting in the 17th century. In the 17th century, remember, Jews had no civil rights, and to some degree they were still persecuted, not as openly as they would have been in a Roman Catholic country, but still subject to persecution. So to protect himself, he undertook these changes that allowed him to integrate better into society. And of course, as my name says, su alma goce la gloria. May his soul enjoy glory. And these pebbles are placed here by individuals who visit the graveyard and who will place them on the gravestone as a way of saying, I recognize you, I know that you lived and died. Here in your memory, I place a pebble, and maybe you might say a line from the traditional ritual prayer associated with death, Kaddish.
Well, stones have a special character in Judaism, and various reasons have been advanced for their use, as opposed to flowers. However, we do know that pebbles have a greater degree of permanence. They do not wilt like flowers do.
Very important point.
Here's an interesting and detailed ledger full of historical information. It is a grave ledger of one of the noted rabbis who came to Barbados during the 18th century. He was known as the Great Circumciser.
And so, here lies interred the body of the most pious and charitable Reverend Menher, a Cohen Belinfante, who was reader to the synagogue 10 years and was beloved by all who knew him. He departed this life the 20th of September, 1752, aged 48 years. And there's some interesting compositions here. Here is a portrayal, almost certainly, of the rabbi in his 18th century robes, standard 18th century costume dress, which is what everybody in the 18th century, mid-18th century, gentlemen of the mid-18th century wore. And he's blowing the shofar, or horn. And in the middle is a hand with a quill, showing that he was a learned person. As a rabbi, he knew the law, and he had to teach the law. And over to the right, because he was a rabbi, he also had to fulfill the duty of circumcising young male children. So these are the instruments of circumcision. And at the top of the ledger, of course, is the Cohen blessing. He was a Cohen. He meant here a Cohen Belinfante. And so he claimed descent from the royal line of David. And that is illustrated there in this particular tomb. And there's a lengthy description of his work here. This is more Portuguese than Spanish. It talks about his mellifluous and suave voice as Hazan. He read the Torah. He was admired by all as a good master. He taught the Torah. Despite all the affronts that he suffered, on occasion he carried out his office zealously and with devotion. He was patient, tolerant, and he sacrificed his own personal convenience for the public good. Yes, he was a good man, and this is reflected in what was said about him. Yes.
The Great Circumciser was a good man to the Jewish community indeed. We move now to the tombstone of the little ones. Here the iconography reveals the depth of their parents' love.
And in this corner, two children's graves. Here we have two doves flying. And in the corner, very interesting, and this is very beautifully carved, the face of a cherub. And each corner of this gravestone would have had these winged cherubs. But you can see again, this is one of the ones that was probably very badly damaged in the 1831 hurricane. And an attempt has been made to fit the stones back together. And here in this one is the daughter, it says here, Fia, of David and Simha Valverde. This is, she died at the age of 37 months, 1725. And here we have the angel picking the flower. She died as a flower. So the flower has been picked and her life terminated. And in the corner there, the icon, again, a bird flying, the dove. Again, painful stories, and again, the historical reality that life was very often short. And throughout the world, in the 17th and 18th century, as I said, lifespan was limited, and 40, 45 years was essentially all that you could expect of life. But there were a lot of difficulties in the age before antibiotics and understanding of medicine. Childbirth was a very dangerous time for young women. And remember too that at this period of time, young women married at the age of 14, 15. By 15, 16, if you weren't married, then people felt, well, you know, something strange was happening, that you were destined never to marry. But with each childbirth, of course, the problems associated with birth using dirty wrappings or dirty napkins or even dirty instruments that were used in the process of childbirth, and septicemia very often set in.
And throughout this cemetery and in many all around the island, you will see the tragic story of death while giving birth to children. This happened time and time again. In fact, quite a number of teenagers are buried here, and the majority of them died in childbirth or their children died.
This one died at 16 months. This one died at 37 months. This one died at 18 months. So, and that gives me the opportunity to make another important point. Attitudes towards death. In the 17th century, death surrounded people, and people saw death as, well, a fact of life that was unavoidable. You accepted death. And so the grave memorials tended to be very brief. Here lieth ye body, and the skull and cross once the icon. By the late 18th century, with the scientific revolution, with the Enlightenment, attitudes towards death in the Western world had changed. And so now you tend to get a softening of attitudes. You tend to get epitaphs that are very long and flowery, and they attest to all the tributes of the individual who had died. In the 19th century, you get the Victorian period, and again, you see a shift in attitudes towards death. And in the Victorian period, you get a very sentimental type of epitaph. It's as if you're challenging death, and you don't want to recognize death. And then you come forward to our time, where again, death rituals and the whole process of the burial of the dead changed radically. And I've seen it in my lifetime, for example. Today, we follow the North American pattern, so the coffin is there on a raised platform with a carpet, and people come around and the prayers are said, and then everybody leaves, and the coffin is left there very often. Whereas in my childhood, everybody stood around and the coffin was lowered into the ground, and then the closest members of the family would take up a handful of dirt and throw on the coffin, and it was that catharsis, that release of the psychic energy that tied you to the departed, and it was part of the grieving process. I think in today's modern world, we actually want to deny death. There are now talks of cryogenics and preserving our bodies for some time in the future when we can be brought back to life. Science is being called upon to stop death. We want to live longer. So there's forecasts that saying, well, say with genetic manipulation, etc., our lifespan now can perhaps be expanded to 150, 200 years somewhere down in the future. And so that's on the cards, that humanity is seeking ways and means of postponing the inevitable for as long as we possibly can. So again, all these shifts in cultural perspectives and worldviews over time are reflected, and a walk through a graveyard can tell us many tales. Tales that are appropriate to the past, tales of the present, and tales of the future.
Dr. Bani Wasserman specializes in Lusophone world cinema and literature, Lusophone theater, and Sephardic studies. While not revealing any tales from the tombs, Dr. Wasserman used the inscription on the tombs to assist a lady in finding the tomb of her ancestor.
While wandering through the tombs, I noticed an older woman just kind of looking and just searching, and I didn't know what she was searching for. So I went up to her and I said, "Can I help you in any way?" And she said, "Well, I'm looking for the tomb of one of my ancestors, and I don't know where she is. I haven't been able to find her." So she wandered, and I said, "Let me help you." And I went to the other side of the graveyard, and there I found a small gravestone, and it had the names of a father and a mother and a child. And the numbers on marking the dates, marking the grave, were of a 3-year-old child. And on top there was an angel, a fallen angel, which traditionally isn't Jewish, but you know, we're talking about a very mixed type of graveyard. And I called over to her and I said, "I think I found it, I think I found it." And she came over as quick as she could, and she looked down, and I go, "Who is this?" She goes, "You see this name? This is my great-great-grandfather." And I was amazed, and her reaction and my reaction, I just shed a tear, because to find your great-great-grandfather amongst all the tombs way in the back, and she herself did not identify herself as being Jewish, but it really didn't matter, because she had ancestry that went back to the 16th century. I found it amazing.
The uniqueness of this compound is embraced by many.
And it makes me feel proud as a Barbadian to be able to come here, to have this piece of history in the museum and the Jewish synagogue here. And I honestly do believe that as a heritage site, that we need to make sure that it is not only kept well, but promoted throughout the rest of the world, because to have a Jewish synagogue here is not something that can be taken for granted or taken lightly, but rather something that we should embrace. We should embrace our history, embrace not only the fact that we would have come from Africa, but the fact that we would have had a number of other inputs from throughout the world that would have created what we know today as our own home, Barbados.
I walked around the tombstones, and I was just amazed, because the names and the images on the actual tombs were beautiful. And they have Portuguese, which I speak, as well as Judeo-Portuguese, which is a mixture of Portuguese and Spanish, and Hebrew and Old English. And it's through the centuries that mixes it all together. So this visit has been wonderful for me, and hopefully people will learn more about this part of Bridgetown.
Kaddish da
In addition to the cemetery, there is a wealth of information to be found in the Jewish Museum. The Nidi Israel Museum, literally meaning the scattered of Israel, documents the contribution made by Jews to the island, one that set off profound ripples throughout the 17th and 18th century. It is an interactive museum built inside what was once the Jewish schoolhouse overlooking the synagogue and the cemetery. Inside, the floor is laid with large cement slabs that create a visual connection between those buried outside and their stories as told in the museum. Walk deeper and you'll find yourself standing on glass cases containing relics from Barbados' Jewish ancestors. Their story is told in the museum as they seek to connect the past with the present. Of course, you could also enter the synagogue to prayer. The present synagogue was rebuilt on the original site after the first one was destroyed by the 1831 hurricane. The reconstructed synagogue is a beautiful building combining Jewish, Gothic, Renaissance, and Barbadian architectural features and stands amid what is recognized as one of the first major Jewish communities in the Americas. Finally, your visit here is not complete without entering the Jewish mikveh bathhouse, descending the steps, and beholding what is arguably one of the wonders of the modern world, a Jewish ritual bath constructed more than 300 years ago and taps into the natural aquifer of Barbados. Tales from the Tombs of the Jewish Cemetery in historic Bridgetown, part of our UNESCO World Heritage Site. We end this program with historian Dr. Carl Watson perspectives on why this area is so well preserved.
The Jewish community over the millennia, because of the various diasporas that they have faced, because of constant persecution that they have faced, I think that Jews developed a sense and an understanding of history, and they use history and pattern their lives around history, and use history as a vehicle both for survival, for strengthening their community, and for identity. They use history for all the reasons that history is so important for. That sense of identity, that sense of understanding who you are. And so I applaud the Jewish community for the effort and energy. It's a small community, and I applaud them for the effort and energy and time and expense that they've taken to preserve an aspect of history that ultimately, in the final analysis, is Barbadian history.
There you have it, some interesting tales from the tombs and other evidence of the Jews' material culture to be found here on the compound. Thanks to historian Dr. Carl Watson, the Jewish community, and all those responsible for the maintenance of the compound. Do join us again next time as we go around the island and reveal tales from the tombs.
And so she was the last person to be buried here in this tomb. And my great-grandfather said, no one must ever be buried here again because she had led a disturbed life and she must never be disturbed after death.
Thank you for staying with me. I'm Sherwood McCaskey.
I